I call the honourable member Joe Goodhue.
Question B now.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
I will call the honourable member Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I thought this might be a timely opportunity to respond to one or two of the comments that have been made by colleagues from both sides of the House, in fact. And to begin with, to Pete Hodgson, who in his initial contribution I think raised two very important issues. The first of those was what was the process that had been gone through to reach the point at which the humanities could be drawn in to the Royal Society to create, as I think my colleague Carol Beaumont, who's just resumed her seat, highlighted the situation where there are so many issues that we face today that are in fact a combination of the sciences and the humanities, the way that we deal with them, the way that we talk about them, the way that we describe them. But this is not a decision to be taken lightly. The Royal Society is an organisation with a huge history, and I'm not allowed to refer to Mr Hodgson's absence, but we did have a debate last time we were discussing this about when the Royal Society actually commenced, and I was able to discover it was the 10th of October 1867 that it in fact began its life. So it's an organisation with a great deal of history, it's an organisation with a serious contribution to make, and it is up to this point been composed of what we would call scientists. Now, it does include the social sciences already, and that has caused some confusion, but it has been, up until this point, an organisation associated with science in its most serious forms. The inclusion of the humanities, therefore, is not something to be taken lightly. And Mr Lees-Galloway also raised the fact that there were people who were concerned about that, and we've already discussed earlier in the debate the submission of the Wellington branch of the Royal Society to the Select Committee. And they did raise the concerns that Mr Shearer and others have raised around the question of, is there a dilution of the sciences and the ability of the society to advance sciences by the inclusion of the humanities? And they raise those concerns as an organisation, as they point out, that had been going longer than the overall Royal Society as a Wellington branch. Now, the Royal Society itself responded to the Select Committee with a very thorough explanation of the process, and it goes right back to the fact that the decision to incorporate the humanities was presented to the Council of the Royal Society, it was presented to the Academy Council, and it was presented to the Fellows over a period of time through 2009. And at all of those occasions, the Fellows, the Academy Council members, the Council members were given the opportunity to give feedback. And at each stage of that process, there was a universal endorsement of this idea. And the reason there was a universal... and exactly, as Mr Hodgson said, it would be a rare time to find such universal agreement among scientists and social scientists. And the letter that went from the Royal Society to the Fellows, I think, is a very interesting one, because what it does is it actually makes the point that for the promotion of scholarship and excellence in research in New Zealand, there actually needs to be a coming together of the arts and the sciences. And so while there was dispute, in the submission that was made to the Select Committee, the decision to incorporate the humanities was one that was thoroughly discussed. It was not totally accepted by all those members of the Royal Society, but at the Council level, at the Academy level, and at the Fellows level, it was accepted. And so I do think, to answer Mr Hodgson's question, yes, there was a degree of argy-bargy, but it wasn't at the level that would stop this going through, or stop me as the member for Wellington Central being presented with a bill which I am taking on behalf of the Royal Society, and think that I would have any concern about it. But I've been at great pains in this debate to acknowledge the fact that there was some debate from the Wellington branch in particular about this, but that overall the benefits to the Royal Society of incorporating the humanities are great. The other point that Mr Hodgson raised in his speech was around, as he said, the question of the importance of bringing these together. Mr Hodgson mentioned the Genetic Modification Royal Commission, which was something I also was involved in as a non-scientist, looking to be able to interpret relatively complex scientific concepts in a political way as the advisor to the minister who was responsible for that Royal Commission. And that was the classic bringing together of the sciences and the arts. And in fact, some of the contributions around the ethical dimensions are to me, the cutting edge of why humanities and sciences need to come together. But with respect to Mr Hodgson, to me the most interesting aspect of this is actually the future, not the past. It's actually the opportunities that can arise for us by the bringing together of the arts and the sciences, Mr Chair.
The Honourable Member Grant Robertson.
The bringing together of the arts and the sciences provides for us in the future, because we had a lot of talk about knowledge societies, knowledge waves, how we're going to add value to our products. I know Mr Hodgson, if he ever goes to the Westpac Stadium, looks out and sees all that wood, all those logs sitting piled up on that waterfront, and it grieves him to see that, because sitting there is the product of nature, the product of science, and yet we haven't applied the innovation to it, to turn it into something that's of greater value to New Zealanders. There's the coming together of the arts and the sciences that I want to see. That's the bit where the Royal Society can contribute as to how we bring together innovation. All over the world, innovation in science has been driven by multidisciplinary teams. You can go to any country, you can go to Taiwan, and you'll see innovation parks that include scientists, engineers, but also designers, historians, linguists, marketers, people who will actually bring the concepts together. We don't have to go to Taiwan. You can just go and see a factory in New Zealand. I went to a Fonterra factory recently. The people who do the packaging, the designers and the artists who do the packaging are as important as the people who are working out whether they can put those probiotics into the milk. What can they do? How can they actually make those things work together? So that's the bit that I'm focused on, Mr Hodgson, is the future of the linkages between arts and sciences. I want to turn to Alan Peachey's contribution briefly, and I want to say two things. The first is I'm not sure if Mr Peachey was listening to me when I worked my way through the Memorandum of Understanding between the Council of Humanities and the Royal Society, but I want to repeat for his benefit the clause in point 2 of the Memorandum of Understanding, which said, quote, within 5 years, the Royal Society will use its best endeavours to have its Act reflect the inclusion of the humanities alongside science and technology. That was February 2010. Here we are in May 2011 making excellent progress towards that goal. In the meantime, the Royal Society and the Council of Humanities have begun working together, bringing fellows together from the Council and the Royal Society and working on exactly the things we've just been discussing. What we are doing is providing the legislative tick-off to that, and we will do that in time. But for Mr Peachey to say that it is somehow wrong for members of this House to want to make a contribution about what is one of the most important changes to the way we think about knowledge in New Zealand, to the way we think about our future innovation in New Zealand, I think sad. There is an opportunity here on a Members' Day for individual members to make a decision that they want to stand up and talk about the importance of science and the arts and humanities together, and I think that is a good thing. Mr Peachey is concerned about a bill further down the order paper about the freedom of association. Well, Mr Peachey knows very well that there were opportunities to change that bill in the Select Committee that might have seen it progress a little quicker, and those opportunities weren't taken. So on this, from my point of view as the sponsor of this bill, I'm not going to take the blame for members of the National Party not taking the opportunity to be able to progress that bill in a much quicker way. What I am going to do is support this bill because I think it is a good bill, but I will not stand here and say that people cannot be allowed to have their say on this bill. This is a bill that deserves debate. It will pass. It will pass well before the time limit the Royal Society have set for themselves. And it will, in the meantime, give them the opportunity to develop the linkages that they are already developing, knowing that they will get the legislative passage that they need. So, Mr Chair, I think in Part 4 we've heard an interesting debate. I know that there are colleagues who are yet to make a contribution in Part 4 on the purpose who want to. It's an important clause in this bill because it defines exactly why we are doing and what we are doing. And, Mr Chair, I think there needs to be opportunity for people to be heard on this bill. Members make a choice on Members' Day to come down to this House, to this chamber, and have their say. There are very few opportunities for members to be able to talk on their own terms in this House in the system we have. and this is a very important opportunity. I would urge members who want to take a call. The Royal Society know that I am taking a responsible attitude with the passing of this bill. I strongly support it. It will pass in good time when all members have had the chance to have their say.
I call the honourable member Colin King.
I move that the question be now put.
The question is that the question be now put. As many of that opinion will please say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question now is that Clause 4 stand part. All those in favour please say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question now is that Clause 5, Te Raro Flavel's typescript amendment to amend the definition of humanities. Clause 5 as amended stand part.
Mr. Chair.
I call the honourable member Grant Roberts.